She was supposed to be the one in control, but there she was, drunk, stumbling, about to make a huge mistake. And then, he caught her. Before we dive into this story, I need to know something. Have you ever had to save someone from themselves? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if you believe life can surprise you when you least expect it, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this ends. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Jake hadn't planned to stop at the bar that night. His shift had run late, and he'd promised his daughter, Ellie, he'd be home to help with her school project. But when he passed by the small dive bar on the corner of Oak Street, he thought he might as well grab a drink, just one, before he went back to the grind of single fatherhood. It wasn't much of a choice, really. The day had been long. The bills were piling up, and some time to himself, even for just an hour, was rare enough to feel like a small victory. He walked into the dimly lit bar, the scent of stale beer mixing with the sharp tang of cheap whiskey. The jukebox hummed in the background, an old country song playing low enough to make conversation almost impossible. Jake slid onto one of the stools, nodding at the bartender, who already knew what to pour. "Rough day?" the bartender asked, setting a glass of bourbon in front of him. "Just another one," Jake muttered, taking a long sip. He had no intention of staying long. But then she walked in. Sophia, his boss, the woman who held his job, and the job of everyone else in the office, in her hands. The one who was always in control, always wearing a polished, almost untouchable expression. Her confidence was the kind that kept the office running like clockwork, but it was the same kind of confidence that could turn anyone into a shadow of themselves if they dared cross her. Tonight, however, she wasn't the polished CEO Jake had grown accustomed to seeing at work. She was stumbling. Her heels were too high, her dress too tight. Her face was flushed, and her makeup, usually immaculate, was smeared just enough to show the cracks in her armor. She weaved through the bar like a marionette with the strings cut, her movements uncoordinated. Jake knew she'd been drinking, probably more than a little, given the way she was leaning on the bar, laughing too loudly at some joke no one else heard. Jake watched for a moment, his gut tightening. He knew she was out of her element. The once imposing figure now seemed fragile, vulnerable. And then it happened. Sophia's foot caught on the edge of a stool, and she lurched forward, losing her balance. Her hands reached out, but everything she touched was too far away. Her body tumbled toward the edge of the bar, her drink splashing onto the floor. She didn't even seem to notice. Jake stood up instinctively, his heart racing. Before he could even think, he was there, catching her just before she hit the ground. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her against him to steady her. She looked up, her hazel eyes wide and unfocused. For a moment, she just stared at him, as if trying to piece together what was happening. "Jake?" she slurred, a half-smile forming on her lips. "What are you doing here?" His breath was shallow, his hands still gripping her tightly. Felt wrong, like he shouldn't be this close. He should have let her fall, kept his distance. But something inside him, something he hadn't even realized was there, pushed him to do the opposite. "I'm not gonna let you fall," he said softly, guiding her back to her feet. Sophia blinked, as if the words hadn't quite registered. Then she laughed, the sound hollow and bitter. "You don't have to do this, Jake. I'm fine." But she wasn't fine. Her voice wavered. Her posture was weak. Jake could feel the weight of her body leaning against him. She needed help, but she didn't want to admit it. He hesitated for a moment, the bartender eyeing them from behind the counter. Jake knew the scene could get ugly fast. People in this town talked. If this got out, it would be more than just a gossip session at the office. Could cost Sophia her reputation, and Jake his job. But before he could say anything else, Sophia pulled away from him, her eyes suddenly cold, distant. "Thanks for the rescue," she muttered, her voice clipped. "I can handle it from here." She reached for her purse, her hands unsteady. She fumbled with the clasp, frustration marking her features. Jake felt the tight knot in his stomach. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. "I'll take you home," he said firmly. stepping closer to her, trying to steady her again. She shook her head, dismissing him. "I don't need you to babysit me, Jake," she snapped, suddenly back to her usual sharp tone. "I'm fine." But Jake saw something different in her eyes. There was a vulnerability there now, something raw and unguarded. He couldn't shake it. "Listen, Sophia," he said quietly, his voice softening. "I'm not letting you walk out of here like this. Please." She stared at him for a long moment, her walls still up, but there was something behind those walls. And when she finally let out a defeated sigh, her shoulders slumping just a little, Jake knew he had won, though he wasn't sure why she'd given in. "I don't need this right now," she said, but her voice lacked its usual strength. "But fine. You can take me home." And just like that, they were walking out of the bar together, the cold night air hitting them as they stepped into the darkness of the city. Jake didn't know it then, but that moment would change everything. The next morning, the world felt different to Jake. He had stayed up too late, staring at his phone, his mind replaying the night again and again. He couldn't shake the image of Sophia, so vulnerable and off balance. The sharp, confident woman he knew at work had been gone for a few hours, replaced by someone who seemed human, flawed, fragile like the rest of them. He had gotten home just past midnight, hoping his daughter, Ellie, would still be asleep, but she wasn't. She sat up on the couch in the living room, watching TV, a bowl of cereal beside her. "Dad, you're late," she said, her voice flat, the kind that meant she wasn't mad, just noticing. "Yeah, sorry, sweetie. I got caught up with something at work," he said, trying to keep it casual as he ruffled her hair, masking the exhaustion he felt deep in his bones. He watched her for a moment before he went to his bedroom. The weight of what he had just done, taking Sophia home, comforting her, settled like a stone in his chest. It was a bad idea, he knew, but he'd been unable to walk away. No matter how much he tried to convince himself that it was the right thing, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was crossing a line. They were boss and employee, and now it seemed they were something more, or at least the potential for something more. By the time he woke up the next morning, his head felt heavy, and his daughter was already up and dressed, her school bag slung over her shoulder. "Morning, Dad," Ellie said, her bright smile cutting through his fog. "Morning, kiddo." Jake tried to smile back, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "What's on the agenda for today?" "Math test," Ellie replied with a sigh. "But I'll be fine. You're still taking me to school, right?" "Of course. Let's grab some breakfast on the way." Jake tried to shake off the unease he'd been carrying all morning. After dropping her off at school, Jake headed to the office, his stomach twisting. He knew what was coming. He had no idea how Sophia would act after last night. The thought of facing her was like looking into a mirror that showed everything he didn't want to see. When he stepped into the office, it was the same as always, busy, bustling, and filled with the noise of people trying to make it through another workday. But as soon as Jake stepped into the lobby, he saw her. Sophia stood by the elevator, her gaze fixed on the floor. She was dressed in her usual crisp business attire, but something about her seemed off. Her shoulders were tense, her back straight, but there was a nervous energy around her. Jake walked toward her, trying to act casual, even though every nerve in his body was on edge. When she finally noticed him, her expression didn't change, but the tension between them was undeniable. "Morning," Jake said, keeping his voice neutral. Sophia nodded stiffly. "Jake." Her voice was quiet, controlled, but he could hear the slight tremor beneath the surface. There was an awkward pause, the kind of silence that stretched on too long, full of things neither of them wanted to say. I'm sorry about last night," Jake said, trying to break the tension. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't do anything wrong," she interrupted, her voice sharp, though her eyes were hesitant. "You helped me, that's all." Jake nodded but didn't speak for a moment, feeling a knot tighten in his throat. He didn't know what he had expected, but he hadn't expected her to sound so distant. She wasn't angry, but she wasn't grateful either. It was like she was trying to convince herself that the night hadn't meant anything. "I'm glad you're okay," Jake said quietly. Sophia glanced at him, her eyes softening just slightly. "I'm fine," she said, though the words felt empty. "It's just embarrassing. I don't want anyone to know what happened." She paused, her lips pressing together as if to keep back something. "Especially not the team." "I won't say anything," Jake promised. He wasn't about to make this harder for her. Sophia nodded, but Jake could see the struggle behind her eyes. It wasn't just about embarrassment. She was closing off, retreating into the person she thought she had to be. Cold, controlled, perfect. But Jake had seen enough last night to know that wasn't who she really was. "I should get to my office," she said. And with that, she turned and walked away, the distance between them growing with every step. Jake stood there for a moment, watching her disappear into the elevator. He wanted to say something else, but he didn't know what. The moment they'd shared the night before had cracked something wide open, something neither of them could ignore anymore. But now Sophia was acting like nothing had changed. As he walked to his desk, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something he couldn't walk away from. Sophia had crossed a line too, but she was pretending she hadn't, and it made everything worse. Have you ever tried to move on from something, but it kept pulling you back? You know the feeling when you can't just forget? If you've ever felt like this story hits close to home, hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, you'll want to see where this goes. The next few days were nothing like Jake had imagined. The office felt colder, quieter. Sophia had retreated behind her usual professional exterior, but there were moments, small moments, where Jake caught glimpses of what she was hiding. He knew her well enough by now to see the cracks in her armor, even if she tried to cover them up. Every interaction between them was clipped, brief, almost mechanical. There was no warmth, no easy conversation, just business. Jake was used to his boss being distant, but this was different. There was an edge to it now, something personal, something unspoken, and it bothered him more than he cared to admit. Sophia hadn't mentioned the incident at the bar again. Not a word. It was as if it had never happened. But Jake could feel it hanging in the air every time they crossed paths. The night they shared had changed things, but Sophia was determined to act like it hadn't. He told himself he shouldn't care. She was his boss. That's all. The kind of person who lived in a world of power and control, where feelings had no place. Still, Jake couldn't stop thinking about her. Her laugh that night, the way she'd leaned on him for support when she was too drunk to stand. She hadn't been the CEO then. She'd been just a woman, vulnerable and real. And Jake had caught a glimpse of something deeper. But the next morning, after he had taken her home, she shut it all down. The brief moment of softness, of connection, had disappeared in an instant. She'd gotten out of his car that night like nothing had changed. Like it was all a blur. Something she could forget the moment she woke up. It was easier for her to forget. She was the boss, the one with the power. Jake was just an employee. One who was still holding on to the remnants of that night. But he wasn't about to make it worse. He'd said his piece. He'd helped her. That was enough. The problem was, he couldn't get her out of his head. It was Friday afternoon when it all started to unravel. Jake was sitting at his desk, working through the usual mountain of reports, when he saw Sophia coming out of her office. She was dressed in her usual sharp suit, her posture perfect as always. But today, there was something different about her. The way she carried herself was off. Tighter, more guarded. She passed by Jake's desk without a word, but he could feel the tension in her every step. He watched her disappear into the conference room down the hall, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. He didn't know why, but he couldn't let it go. He needed to talk to her. Pushing his chair back, he stood up and walked toward the conference room, his steps slow, deliberate. He wasn't sure what he was expecting. Maybe an apology. Maybe an explanation. He wasn't even sure what he wanted to say to her. When he reached the door, he hesitated, taking a deep breath. His hand hovered over the handle. Was he really about to do this? Was it worth it? Before he could make up his mind, the door opened, and there she was, Sophia, standing there in front of him, her eyes wide with surprise. "Jake? What are you doing here?" Her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it. She wasn't angry, but she wasn't pleased either. I just wanted to talk, Jake said, his voice a little rougher than he intended. Sophia raised an eyebrow, glancing past him as if to see if anyone was watching. The hallway was empty, but there was still something about the way she held herself that made the space feel smaller, more intense. I don't think there's anything to talk about, Jake, she replied, her words cold, calculated. But Jake wasn't going to back down. I know you're trying to forget what happened, he said quietly, his voice low enough so no one could overhear. But I'm not sure I can. Sophia stiffened at the words, her jaw tightening. She didn't say anything right away. Instead, she looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching, as if weighing something deep inside. Then, finally, she sighed, her shoulders relaxing just a little. I don't know what you want me to say, she said, her voice softer now. It was just one night, Jake. Nothing more. Jake swallowed hard. The words stung more than he expected. One night. Nothing more. Was that all it was? But even as the words left her mouth, Jake could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She wasn't so sure. Not really. I get it, Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. It's just hard to ignore, that's all. Sophia closed her eyes for a brief second, like she was trying to gather her thoughts. When she opened them again, there was something softer there, something more vulnerable than she wanted him to see. I know you're not used to me being less than perfect, she said quietly. But that's who I am, Jake. Not some mess that you can fix. She looked away, her gaze focusing on something far off down the hall. It was a moment of weakness. The walls she'd built up so carefully were cracking, and Jake could see right through them. I never thought you were perfect, Jake said softly. I just thought maybe you needed someone to be real with you for once. Sophia's lips pressed into a thin line, and she seemed to struggle with something inside her. She took a step back, looking at him one last time, her eyes conflicted. I can't do this right now, she said finally, her voice tight. I have a meeting. We'll talk later. With that, she turned away and walked into the conference room, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving Jake standing in the hallway, his heart heavy. For a moment, he wondered if she would ever let him in. But then he realized, maybe she wasn't the only one who was hiding from the truth. Have you ever tried to break through someone's walls, only to realize they weren't ready to let you in? Tell me what happened in the comments. And if you've ever been in a situation where words couldn't fix things, hit that subscribe button. The story is far from over. This act shows Jake trying to make a real connection, but Sophia continues to deny the emotions and the vulnerability they shared. The emotional weight of their situation grows, and we see the internal battle both characters are facing. Sophia trying to protect herself, and Jake struggling to hold on to something more than just professional distance. The week had dragged on, each day filled with the same quiet tension. Jake and Sophia kept their distance at work, both pretending nothing had changed. But underneath it all, there was a flicker, something neither of them could deny, even if they tried to ignore it. That morning, Jake had just sat down at his desk, coffee in hand, when his phone buzzed. It was an email from Sophia, the subject line simple, "Need your help." Jake's eyes narrowed. She'd never asked him for help directly before, and the tone of the email felt different. He clicked open the message. Jake, I need you to come to the conference room in 15 minutes. It's urgent. The word urgent made his stomach tighten. There was no time to second-guess it. He grabbed his notepad, took one last gulp of coffee, and headed for the conference room. When he walked in, Sophia was already there, pacing back and forth. Her usual composure was gone, her brow furrowed, her hands moving restlessly. The sharp businesswoman was replaced by someone who looked like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. You wanted to see me? Jake asked, keeping his voice neutral as he stepped inside. Sophia stopped pacing and turned to face him, her eyes flashing with a mix of frustration and something else. She looked at him like she didn't know whether to be angry or relieved to see him. I've got a problem, she said, her voice tight. A big one. Jake's mind raced. He could see the stress lines around her eyes, the way her posture was stiff with anxiety. This wasn't the confident, unflappable CEO he'd worked with for months. This was someone on the edge of losing control. "What happened?" Jake asked, his voice softening instinctively. He could tell this was bigger than any work issue. "It's my father," she said, looking away. "He's pushing me to sell the company. He's got investors lined up, and they want me to let go of everything. Everything I've worked for. I don't know what to do." Jake stepped closer, listening closely. This was something he hadn't expected, but the vulnerability in her voice was unmistakable. She wasn't asking for his help as an employee. She was asking as a person who was struggling, someone who needed someone else to see her, really see her. "I thought you were in control of the company," Jake said, trying to make sense of it. "I was," she snapped, her frustration building. "I am, but not anymore. My dad, he thinks it's time for me to hand over the reins, and these investors, they don't care about me, Jake. They care about the bottom line." Sophia's words hit harder than Jake had expected. He could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just fighting for her company. She was fighting for her own sense of identity, the one thing that made her feel in control in a world that always seemed to pull the rug out from under her. Jake didn't know what to say. He could see how much this hurt her. This wasn't about money. This was about everything she had built, everything she had worked for. She let out a long sigh, the tension in her shoulders relaxing just a fraction. "Sorry, I didn't mean to dump all of this on you," she said, the edge in her voice softening. "It's just, I don't know who else to turn to." Jake stood there for a moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. They were standing closer now, closer than they had ever been before. Their professional distance had melted away, replaced by something raw, something real. It wasn't just about work anymore. It was about their lives, about the unspoken connection between them that neither of them could ignore. "You're not alone in this, Sophia," Jake said, his voice steady. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out. You don't have to do this by yourself." She looked at him then, really looked at him like she hadn't before. The walls she'd put up, the ones she'd built to protect herself, were starting to crack. And for the first time, Jake saw the woman beneath the armor. The woman who wasn't perfect, who wasn't always in control. "I don't know what to do anymore," she whispered, the weight of her words making Jake's heart tighten. Jake didn't think. He acted. Without another word, he stepped closer, his hand gently reaching out. He touched her arm, just lightly, but the connection between them was immediate and unexpected. Her eyes flicked down to where his hand rested, then back up to his face. For a split second, the world around them seemed to blur. "I'll help you. Whatever you need," Jake said, his voice steady, even though his pulse was racing. He wasn't sure where this was going, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about her company anymore. It was about them. Sophia didn't pull away. Instead, she took a deep breath and looked at him, her face softening just a little. "Thank you," she said, her voice quieter now, vulnerable in a way that she rarely let anyone see. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Jake replied, his hand still resting lightly on her arm. "We'll figure it out. Together." They stood there for a long moment, neither of them moving, neither of them saying anything more. The tension between them was thick, but there was something else now, something unspoken. Sophia's walls were still there, but they were beginning to crack. Have you ever had someone you thought you couldn't count on suddenly show up when you needed them the most? If you've ever been there, share your story in the comments. And if you believe that even the strongest people need someone to lean on, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. The days after the conference room encounter felt heavier than usual. Jake had tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting back to Sophia. There was something undeniably real about their conversation, something that neither of them could shake off. For the first time, Sophia had let her guard down, even if just for a moment. But it wasn't enough. Not for Jake. He knew that Sophia was still fighting something deep inside her. She wasn't just struggling with her father's pressure. She was running from something, a piece of her past she hadn't shared with anyone. Jake wasn't sure what it was. He didn't know if he wanted to know, but he knew that whatever it was holding her back. He thought about it all weekend. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face. She wasn't the confident CEO. She was the woman who had sat in front of him, broken and lost, in that moment of vulnerability. She had been human, not the untouchable figure everyone else saw. Monday morning came, and Jake walked into the office with the usual sense of dread. But this time, when he passed by Sophia's office, something was different. The door was slightly open, and he could see her sitting at her desk, head down, her fingers gripping a pen so tightly her knuckles were white. Without thinking, Jake knocked on the doorframe, pushing it open just a little. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice quiet but filled with concern. Sophia didn't look up right away. She didn't even acknowledge him for a few seconds, her eyes still fixed on the papers in front of her. Finally, she exhaled deeply, letting the breath go like a weight she'd been holding in for far too long. "Jake, I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She sounded small, fragile, nothing like the woman he was used to seeing. Jake stepped inside the room, closing the door behind him. "You don't have to apologize," he said gently, walking toward her desk. "I'm just worried. You're pushing yourself too hard." Sophia glanced up at him then, her eyes tired, worn. "I don't know how to stop," she admitted, her voice shaky. "I don't know how to let go of everything I've built. My dad's been trying to take control of this company for years. I spent my whole life fighting for it, Jake. It's all I have left." Jake could feel the weight of her words settling in the air. The walls she had so carefully constructed were starting to crumble, piece by piece, and he could see the raw pain beneath them. "Have you ever thought about why you're fighting so hard?" Jake asked softly. "Maybe you're not just fighting for the company. Maybe you're fighting for something else." Sophia's eyes flicked away from his, staring out the window as if she was trying to find the right words. "I'm fighting for control," she said, her voice cracking. "For the one thing I can control. Because if I don't have that, I don't have anything." Jake's heart ached. He knew this feeling, having nothing but work, having nothing but the things that defined you. But Sophia had buried her feelings so deep, she couldn't even see the truth anymore. "And what about what you want, Sophia?" Jake asked quietly. "Not what your father wants. Not what anyone else wants. What do you want?" Sophia's eyes flicked back to him, her gaze sharp but tired. She didn't answer immediately, but Jake could see the conflict on her face, the storm of emotions she was battling. "I don't know what I want," she said finally, the words sounding heavier than any of the other ones she had said. "All I know is that if I let go of everything, if I let someone else take control, I'll lose who I am. I'll lose everything." The silence in the room stretched long and thick. Jake could feel the truth in her words. She wasn't just talking about the company anymore. She was talking about herself. "Maybe losing everything isn't such a bad thing," Jake said carefully. "Maybe what you're really afraid of is losing the part of you that feels like you have to do everything on your own." Sophia's face tightened, the walls coming back up. She sat straighter, her posture stiffer. "I don't need saving, Jake. I've been doing this on my own for a long time." Jake looked at her, his heart heavy with frustration. "You don't have to do it alone," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're not the only one who's had to fight for everything they have. But that doesn't mean you have to keep fighting alone." Sophia stood up abruptly, shaking her head. "I don't need your pity," she said, her voice rising now angry. "You don't understand. You have no idea what it's like to have everything you've worked for constantly ripped away from you. To have people question your every move, like you're not capable of doing it on your own. I've had to prove myself every day, Jake." Jake didn't back down. "I get it. I do. But you don't have to keep proving yourself to me. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Her breath caught, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. It wasn't pity. It was something else. Something that neither of them had fully acknowledged until now. Sophia closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady herself. When she opened them again, there was something different in her expression. Something softer, more vulnerable. "I don't know what to do," she said quietly. "I've spent so much time building walls. I don't know how to let anyone in." Jake took a step closer, his voice low but steady. "I'm not asking you to let go of everything all at once. But maybe you don't have to do it by yourself anymore." Sophia looked at him then, really looked at him for the first time in days. The wall between them was still there, but it was cracked, just enough to let a little light in. "I'm scared, Jake," she whispered. "I don't know how to stop." "I'm right here," Jake said, his voice steady and warm. "I'm not going anywhere. You don't have to face this alone." Sophia's shoulders relaxed, just a little. She didn't say anything, but for the first time in a long time, Jake saw something in her eyes. A flicker of hope, maybe, or at least the possibility of it. Have you ever fought so hard to keep control, only to realize that the hardest battle is letting someone in? If you've ever been there, drop a comment below and share your experience. And if you believe that even the strongest people need help sometimes, hit that subscribe button. This story is about to get even more intense. The week after their conversation had been a whirlwind. Sophia tried to go back to normal, to act like everything was fine, but the weight of her fears and the walls she'd put up were heavier than ever. Jake had been there for her, but something had changed. They both knew it. There was no going back. Sophia avoided him more now, and Jake could feel the distance. The light moments they shared had turned into awkward silences. Every time he tried to talk to her, she pulled away, her eyes clouded with something he couldn't reach. It was Friday afternoon when everything came to a head. Jake had just wrapped up a meeting when his phone buzzed. It was a text from Sophia. "Meet me in my office in 10 minutes. I need to talk." His stomach dropped. He hadn't heard from her like this since that morning in her office. He didn't know if this would be another one of their quiet talks or something bigger, but he had a feeling he wouldn't like it. He walked to her office, his mind racing. The silence between them was unbearable. His heart beat faster with every step. When he entered her office, she was standing by the window, her back to him. She didn't turn around when he walked in. "Jake." Sophia's voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it that he hadn't heard before. "I need you to understand something. This isn't going to work. Not between us." Jake froze. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. His mind scrambled to make sense of what she was saying. He had always been there for her. He had listened, cared, even shared pieces of himself with her. How could this be happening? "What do you mean?" Jake asked, his voice quiet but heavy with confusion. "What's going on, Sophia?" She finally turned around, but her eyes were cold, distant, like the walls were back up and nothing could break them. "I'm not the person you think I am," she said, her voice trembling with an emotion he couldn't place. "I'm not ready to let anyone in, Jake. Not like you want me to." Jake could feel the anger and frustration building inside him. He had fought so hard to be there for her, to show her that she wasn't alone. And this felt like everything he'd done had been for nothing. "Sophia, you're not being fair. You've been shutting me out, pushing me away, and now you're telling me it's over." He stepped closer to her, his voice rising. "You can't just expect me to walk away when I'm trying to help you." Sophia's eyes flickered with something. Guilt? Regret? But she quickly masked it with a stiff expression. "I didn't ask for your help, Jake. I didn't ask for you to come in here and fix things. I didn't need anyone to save me." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through it. "I've spent my whole life doing this alone, and I'm not going to change now." Jake was speechless. He could feel the walls between them, but they weren't just hers. He had built his own. His frustration was bubbling over, his need to make her see that they could be something more. But this was different. "I don't want to fix you, Sophia," Jake said, his voice raw. "I just want to be here for you. But you keep pushing me away. I'm not trying to save you. I'm trying to be with you." She turned away from him then, her shoulders slumping as she gazed out the window again. The city skyline looked distant and empty. "I don't know how to let anyone in, Jake. I don't know how to open up without feeling like I'm losing myself." The silence between them grew heavy. Jake could feel her words sinking in, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Sophia broke the silence with a shaky laugh. You must think I'm crazy. I don't know what I want anymore. I don't know if I ever did. Jake took a step back, rubbing his hand over his face. He had always respected her strength, but now it was clear that her walls were built so high, they were suffocating her. And now she was suffocating him too. I don't think you're crazy, Sophia, he said quietly. I think you're scared. And I think you're terrified of being vulnerable because you've been hurt before. But what we have, this isn't about fixing you. It's about being there for each other. Sophia looked back at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. I don't know how to do that, she whispered. I don't know how to be with someone else. I've never let anyone close enough to even try. Jake's heart ached for her. He knew she had been carrying this burden on her own for so long, and now it was breaking her apart. I can't just walk away from you, he said, his voice low, steady. But I can't keep fighting for something that isn't real. I can't keep pretending like you're not pushing me away. Sophia's face tightened, the pain evident in the way her lips pressed together. I'm not pretending. I'm just not ready. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of everything left unsaid. Jake felt like his heart was being torn in two. He didn't want to give up on her. He didn't want to walk away from the possibility of something more. But maybe that was exactly what he had to do. Have you ever been in a situation where you wanted to help someone so badly, but they kept pushing you away? It hurts, right? Drop a comment below if you've ever felt like this. And if you believe that sometimes love is about being there even when it's hard, hit that subscribe button. The story is far from over. Jake hadn't heard from Sophia all weekend. The silence was louder than anything he could have imagined. It was different this time. The tension between them was palpable, and he couldn't help but feel like it was his fault. He had pushed too hard, trying to get her to open up when she wasn't ready. And now he had to face the consequences. Monday morning felt like an eternity. He sat at his desk, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He had done everything he could think of to be there for her, to show her that he wasn't going anywhere. But Sophia had built a fortress around herself, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get through. The door to his office opened, and Jake looked up, his heart catching in his throat. It was her. Sophia stood in the doorway, her eyes tired, her posture stiff. She wasn't the confident CEO he had grown accustomed to seeing. She was the woman he had seen that day in her office, the woman who was hurting, who was trying so hard to hold everything together. Jake stood up quickly, the words on the tip of his tongue, but he couldn't speak. He didn't know where to start. I've been thinking, Sophia said, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. She stepped into the room, but she didn't sit down. She kept her distance, like she wasn't sure if she could trust herself around him. About what? Jake asked, his voice low. He didn't know if he was ready for this conversation, but he knew it was long overdue. About everything. She paused, taking a breath, as if trying to steady herself. About me. About us. About why I've been pushing you away. Jake could feel his pulse racing, but he kept his voice steady. Sophia, you don't have to explain. I know why you've been pushing me away. I've seen it and I get it. But that doesn't mean I'm going anywhere. Sophia shook her head, her lips pressed tight. You think it's that simple? She let out a shaky laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. I've spent my whole life being the one in control, Jake. If I let go, if I let anyone in, I'm afraid of losing everything. I'm afraid that I won't know who I am without all these walls. Jake stepped closer, but he didn't push her. He just stood there, watching her, his heart breaking for the woman standing in front of him. She was so strong, yet so fragile, and he could see the weight of her fears. I get that you're scared, Jake said softly, but you're not alone anymore. You don't have to carry this by yourself. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you tell me to. Sophia's eyes fluttered closed, and she let out a long breath, like she had been holding it in for too long. When she opened her eyes again, there was something different in her gaze. Something softer, something more vulnerable. I'm scared, Jake, she admitted. Scared of losing control. Scared of letting someone in and being hurt again. But I'm also scared of losing you. And I don't know what to do with that. Jake felt his heart swell with emotion. He knew she wasn't just talking about their relationship. She was talking about everything that had shaped her. The walls, the fears, the battles she had fought alone. And for the first time, she was letting him see it all. You don't have to be perfect, Sophia, Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to be willing to let someone in, to take that leap of faith. I'm not asking you to change everything overnight. I'm just asking for a chance. Sophia's breath hitched, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence in the room was deafening, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that said everything without words. Finally, Sophia nodded, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but also with something more, a glimmer of hope. I'm not saying it'll be easy, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But maybe I can try. Maybe I can trust you. Jake reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world outside disappeared. The walls between them weren't completely gone, but they had cracked. And that was enough. I'll be here, Sophia, Jake said, his voice steady but filled with warmth. And I'm not going anywhere. Have you ever been so scared to let someone in that you almost pushed them away? If you've ever been there, drop a comment below. And if you believe that love takes time, but it's worth the fight, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss how this story unfolds. A few weeks had passed since the conversation in Jake's office. Things between him and Sophia had been different ever since that day. Lighter, somehow. There was still uncertainty, but there was also something new, something real. They weren't perfect, but they were trying. And for the first time in a long time, Sophia felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. It was a Saturday morning, and Jake was sitting in a small cafe near the office. He had started taking Saturdays off to clear his head, something he hadn't done in years. The quiet buzz of the cafe, the clinking of cups, and the soft chatter of people going about their morning was a comfort. It felt peaceful, like a moment of calm after all the storms they'd weathered. He was staring out the window when he saw her. Sophia, walking down the street, her strides confident but relaxed. She was wearing a simple dress, something that seemed out of character, but in the best way. She had a different look in her eyes, less guarded, more open, and it made Jake's heart race a little. She spotted him through the window, and their eyes met. She smiled, a real smile, one that reached her eyes, and Jake felt something inside him shift. She walked in and sat down across from him, looking him over like she was seeing him for the first time in a while. "How's your Saturday?" she asked, her voice light. "Better now," Jake replied, his smile genuine. "I was just thinking about how far we've come." Sophia nodded, her gaze softening. "Yeah, I've been thinking about that too. I didn't realize how much I was holding on to until I started letting go." Jake reached for her hand across the table, squeezing it gently. "It's okay," he said quietly. "You don't have to let go of everything at once. But I'm glad you're letting me in." Sophia looked down at their hands, the weight of everything they had shared in that small gesture. "I'm not perfect," she said, her voice almost hesitant again. "I still have a lot to figure out, but I'm not afraid of that anymore. I'm not afraid to figure it out with you." Jake's heart swelled with emotion. He had been there for her every step of the way, but hearing her say those words made everything feel like it had been worth it. "I'm not asking for perfection, Sophia," he said softly. "I'm just asking for us to try, and I'm all in, no matter what." She smiled at him then, a smile so full of warmth that it seemed to light up the room. "Me too." For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just sat there, hand in hand, taking it all in. The simple act of being together, without all the walls, without the doubts, felt like enough. They had worked through the hard parts, and now they were here, together, building something new. Sophia took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his again. "I think we have a lot of potential, Jake. A lot of possibility, and I want to see where that takes us." Jake nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. So do I. In that moment, the noise of the cafe, the rush of the world outside, faded away. There was only them, two people who had found their way to each other despite all the challenges, all the fears. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, Sophia felt like she could breathe easy. She leaned across the table, her voice soft but certain. "I'm glad you're still here. I'm glad I didn't lose you." Jake smiled, his thumb gently brushing the back of her hand. "You never could." They shared a quiet laugh, and for the first time, the weight on their shoulders felt just a little bit lighter. The future wasn't something they had to fear anymore. Together, they had learned how to face it head-on, side by side. As they walked out of the cafe together, Jake could feel the warmth of her hand in his, the bond between them stronger than it had ever been. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time he wasn't afraid. With Sophia, he knew they could handle whatever came their way. They had each other, and that was enough. The world was big, full of uncertainty. But for them, at this moment, it felt like it was just the two of them, walking toward something beautiful. Together. Do you believe that love is about finding someone who helps you face your fears, not just share your joys? If the story spoke to you, leave a heart in the comments below. And if you believe in second chances, hit that subscribe button to see more stories that show how love can change everything. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.